Live. Matt, very good morning to you.
How you doing, sir?
Yeah, really well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just for anybody who doesn't really understand what's going on, perhaps you could just explain what prompted this and what's been happening and what's happening to you and where you are.
Sure. It's been a very scary time. It's been a long night again here in Israel and Tel Aviv. Second night in a row of rocket barrages coming in from Hamas in Gaza. We did think yesterday it was going to come earlier, but actually ended up starting around 1 a.m. our time, and back into the bomb shelters, in and out we went throughout the night. Very hard, very strange experience, surreal. For me, you have rocket attack above you, loud booms, scary, very scary experience. And what prompted it all is a bit complicated. I'm happy to go into it and try and explain it in a 30-second clip for you if you want.
Yeah, go for it, because I think, very often we hear about these rocket attacks and we hear about lives being lost and we hear about the devastation, etc. But we don't necessarily understand, well, how did this start? How did it get to this?
Sure. And I think there's been a lot of confusion about that, especially on social media. But a place called Sheikh Jarrah, which is a town of 500 East Jerusalem Arab residents in Jerusalem, were going to be evicted because they were not paying rent. And why were they not paying rent? Their argument was they had been there since 1948 and made a deal with Jordan when they moved in that after a number of years they would not have to pay rent anymore and the houses would become theirs. However, Israel in 1967 won back Jerusalem and made a law in 1970 that anyone living in land that previously was Jewish held would then have to pay rent, and it would become Jewish land again to those people who originally owned the land before 1948 when they were chucked out. It's gone on for a number of years. Rent hasn't been paid by the community. They said we don't need to. Israel said that you do need to. And then this year, finally, Israel said, look, if you don't pay the rent, we're evicting you. And that was the decision made in the courts. And that prompted a huge, as we would say in Israel, balagan, a huge mess. And the problem we have with protests around the country today and the rockets that eventually came in from Hamas.
And I think, again, understanding the complexities of this, of course, it's very easy if you wish to start applying blame. But of course, the complexities are such that no international negotiations and negotiators have been able to untangle this. And it is a simmering situation. Of course, Israel is extremely well funded in terms of its military. You have this Sky Dome. Perhaps explain a little bit about that, because, why is Hamas bothering to send all these rockets in on the basis that very few get through, do they?
Very few do get through. It's called Iron Dome. It's an amazing piece of machinery. It's saved God knows how many lives it's saved over the last 48 hours alone. We've had over 1,000 rockets sent into Israel over the last couple of days from Gaza, with the hope by Hamas that some of them get through. Over the last few years, the improvements in Iron Dome has meant that only a handful will get through and land into city centers, and potentially hit people. Out of the 1,000 rockets, maybe between 10 and 20 have actually landed, but those have killed people and have caused damage. But it's amazing how many lives that has saved.
An Iron Dome, of course, is not a physical structure. It's an interception system that allows for any incoming, if you like, to be sort of targeted. I'm assuming it creates the most extraordinary night sky, in some ways awe-inspiring, in some ways, just thoroughly frightening. What people also don't really understand, I suppose, is Hamas is a terrorist organization. The Palestinians do not even, or certainly those organizations, do not even believe that Israel has a right to exist. Is that right?
Yes. Hamas do more harm to the Palestinians than anything else. They their charter, the document of their formation, is that the Palestinian people will not be free until all Jews are killed, essentially, which is still their charter today. Their mission is not only to destroy Israel, but to kill every Jew in this world. So they are a terrorist organization. They are a prescribed terrorist organization by the majority of the countries in the world. And they had a chance. They had a chance to, in 2005, when Israel left Gaza completely, had a chance to form a new society, a new country. Instead of taking that chance when Israel left completely, they just sent rockets. And ever since then, we've had problems.
It's quite interesting. One of the comments in our papers today comes from Robert Halfon, who's a Conservative MP for Harlow. And he says he hasn't lost hope that a two-state solution is possible, yet Israel cannot be expected to negotiate with a terror group that seeks its destruction. And although there are many aspects of complexity to this, Israeli politics is something that I've followed for many years. I have no idea how to understand the complexities between the system that you have, how people get into power, the fact that they have to form alliances and allegiances all the time. And then, of course, there's this continual sort of noise, if you like, about this, because the international community doesn't really want to engage because they haven't quite worked out what to do, and the UN still doesn't recognize either Palestine or the Palestinians as a nation, which again makes it difficult to come up with solutions. From your perspective, and I understand, of course, this is just but one voice. From your perspective, does this continue to boil over, to bubble up, to lead to terrible violence and then to settle down again? Or do you think that there is a much bigger agreement to be reached?
I think there is a much bigger agreement to be reached. I think a two-state solution has been on the table for many, many years now. Israel have consistently said that they are willing to be partners for peace. And why not? Israel's biggest enemy, Egypt, for so many years from its formation in 1979, Israel had peace with Egypt because they had a leader that wanted to make peace with Israel in Sadat, the prime minister. Again, in 1994, Israel made peace with Jordan. And Israel again tried to make steps to make peace with the Palestinians. As I said, leaving Gaza in 2005, making unilateral steps and putting deals on the table. They just have not been accepted yet. But I do have faith and do believe that we can make a deal in the future. Maybe not with Hamas, but with the Palestinian Authority going forward. We need to start with the West Bank and empowering them. And then we can hopefully empower them to become the leaders in the entire region of the Palestinian people and make a deal.
I'm assuming also, I mean, people must be amazed as to where all these rockets come from. I mean, you know, I'm assuming that Israel doesn't fire first, but if these rocket attacks happen, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these rockets coming over, they must come from somewhere. Presumably it's funded by either other states or I don't know, is it Iran? Do we know where the money comes from?
I don't think it's any secret that the money is Iran. The money comes from Iran. The rockets are funded by and come from Iran, who openly declare that they want to destroy Israel. And Israel only ever responds to rocket fire that comes from Hamas first. There was no reason in a million years this time, especially, why would Israel have attacked Hamas or attacked Gaza in this situation? The rocket fire came out of nowhere, as it always does. From day one, Israel has absolutely no interest than to make peace with the Palestinian people and does not want rocket fire. I do not want to be in a shelter. I don't want to be in a bomb shelter. Israel does not want its people to be in a bomb shelter every night. We want peace. It's the other side that want to destroy us. It's Iran that openly say they want to destroy us. It's Hamas that say they openly want to destroy us, whilst Israel are constantly saying they want peace.
Just finally to you, Matt, as this continues, what do you think those who are listening now, what do they need to do to understand the situation? What would you say to them as somebody who's living in Israel at the moment about this?
The most important thing is what's going on social media at the moment is really disheartening. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not I support the Palestinians or I support Israel. It's not black and white. It's a lot of grey. There's no side is perfect. Yes, it might be us that's being attacked first. everything that Israel does. I'm not saying that everything that Israel does is perfect. I don't say everything that Israel does is right. However, you can't just go on social media and falsely accuse one side of being the perpetrator and the other side of being the victim. You need to look at both sides. I'd encourage people to follow both sides on social media, see the different perspectives, and you will get some nuance. It is really, really disheartening to see how many anti-Semitic comments there are online, how many anti-Islamophobic comments, how many Islamophobic comments there are online because of the crisis in the Middle East. When it shouldn't be that way. People should understand the nuance, understand both sides. We'll only ever get to peace if people come together through dialogue and not through hate.
Matt, listen, we really appreciate you coming on and explaining the situation from your perspective. I know it's been an absolutely awful night and probably a second night of absolutely no sleep whatsoever for you, of those around you, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.